The Marin Elroy is absolutely insane, and I mean that in the best way possible. A chromoly steel hardtail with geometry numbers typically found on a downhill bike? Yes, I am all for it, and so glad this bike exists. A big thank you to Marin for sending me this bike for review. I've already sent it back. No, that's not it behind me. But today we're going to talk about my 90-day experience with this beast of a hardtail. The Elroy retails for $2,799. It's a chromoly steel hardtail with 140 millimeters of suspension travel, and seriously, it's named after Elroy's Mexican Grill, a local favorite of Marin employees. The Elroy logo is a burrito, and the GPS coordinates of the restaurant are on the back of the seat tube. Those are some really cool personal touches. The frame has custom investment cast dropouts for added strength, bottle cage mounts on the down tube and the top tube, external cable routing, and the frame itself has full electronically plated anti-corrosion coating, both inside and out, underneath the paint. Nobody wants a rusty hardtail, and luckily, Marin has thought of it all. The Elroy is offered only in two sizes, regular and grande. Yes, more burrito references. That is awesome. The grande is basically stretched out front by 30 millimeters, so you're getting a longer reach, wheelbase, and top tube. If you are interested in this bike, I would take a deep look into the geometry chart because the size chart says I should be on a grande at my height, but with a 510 millimeter reach, I felt like that is way too long for what I'm used to, but luckily Marin sent me the regular sized, and I think it fit me better. By my scale, the Elroy weighs 33.68 pounds, and that is tubeless with clipless pedals. While on the topic of geometry, it has a 63-degree head tube angle, and it's paired to a steep 78-degree seat tube angle. Reach on the regular size is 480 millimeters, and the wheelbase is 1,252 millimeters, which is actually 37 millimeters longer than my new Trek Top Fuel. There is only one spec build for this bike, but it does come nicely equipped. The fork is a Marzocchi Bomber Z1 air fork, and I liked this thing quite a bit. It comes with a Shimano Dior 12-speed with an FSA Comet crankset. The brakes are Shimano MT420 4-piston calipers with a 203 rotor up front and a 180 out back. And as it seems with all modern bikes, I feel like the brakes are the low point of the spec. It has Shimano hubs laced to Marin branded rims, rolling on Maxxis Assegai tires, and a 29 by 2.5 inch width. This was my first time riding a bike with Maxxis Assegai tires, and I have to admit, I absolutely hate them for where I live. The dropper post is an X-Fusion Manic, and because I got the smaller regular size, it only has 150 millimeters of drop, so you may notice that the post is sticking way far up out of the seat tube. With this being the longest, lowest, and slackest bike I've ever ridden, it honestly felt kind of awkward to me at first. The front end is just so long compared to what I normally ride, and the steep seat tube angle puts you in such an upright position, it kind of almost feels like the pedals are slightly behind you. After about a week of riding this bike, it started to feel a lot more natural, and honestly, it started to feel really good. Climbing isn't this bike's most strong suit, and I don't think anyone expected it to be, and it's probably not a determining factor for the bike's target market. That awkward seat tube angle I mentioned just a second ago really puts you in a great position when going up a steep hill, but pair this with the fact that the front end is so long, it weighs nearly 34 pounds, and the Maxxis Assegai tires are incredibly sluggish, it doesn't make for the most enjoyable climb. But rejoice, because once you are at the top, you are about to have the most fun you'll ever have on a hardtail.
Woo! Cool. Now this is where this bike comes alive. Downhill.
Words can't express how fast this bike is on a descent. It literally rewards you for going faster because this thing is so incredibly stable at speed. I took the Elroy to Spider Mountain Bike Park and honestly, half the time I forgot I was on a hardtail until the rear end had a harsh hit on a rock.
It's fast.
I feel like I could just roll up to any descent, let off the brakes, and this bike had my bag. No hardtail will ever be as forgiving as a full suspension bike, but I did ride the Elroy back to back that same day as the aluminum Rocky Mountain Growler, and all I can say is, steel is real. The Elroy was far more forgiving than the aluminum Growler. Shocking revelations here on Cobra Kyle. Steep sections felt super controlled, you can just hammer berms as fast as you are comfortable with, and I cannot say enough about the joy this bike brings when pointed downhill. If you can't tell, I had a really good time riding this bike. But what about day-to-day trail riding? This bike was pretty cool on my local trails, but it wasn't as fun at slower speeds than a less aggressive hardtail. Living in Texas, we have a lot of flat, chunky trails where I can't have this bike fully pinned all of the time. In these slow, technical sections, the Elroy can be a bit cumbersome to ride, and you definitely have to be up over the front end to keep that wheel in check. I tried to show that in these two clips where one, I'm sitting upright, pedaling around like a normal bike, and then the other one, I'm a little more in the attack position, up on the front wheel, making sure it tracks straight through those rocks. Can you see the difference on film? I don't know, that's for you to decide, but you can definitely feel the difference when you're the person riding the bike. This isn't the bike you grab when you want to go have a calm piddle paddle through the woods, looking at some birds, picking some berries, having a picnic by yourself or with a loved one if you got one. I don't know. This isn't that bike. As you can imagine, you do have to swing this bike a bit wider when working in tight, twisty trails, but it's pretty easy to manage once you're pretty comfortable on the bike. As I mentioned earlier, I find the Maxxis Assegai tires to be way too much tire for like 90% of the trails I ride. They are incredibly grippy and durable, which is excellent if you frequent bike parks or you have a lot of steep, loose enduro lines. But 90% of the trails I ride, you have to pedal quite a bit, and these tires are just far too sluggish. Luckily, that's a spec choice that's easy to change. Just for one ride, I did swap my Light XC wheel set onto this bike just for fun. It saved almost like 4 pounds, and it completely transformed the bike on my local trails. So if you're buying this bike and you live somewhere like I do that doesn't have a ton of elevation, I would strongly suggest putting a slightly less aggressive tire on it. Jumping and dropping, there was also a bit of an adjustment period when I first got on this bike. In my first few rides, I noticed that I was either getting bucked forward or my front end was dipping a little more than I like it to off of drops, and I think it's because I was doing my compressions like a split second too late because I'm used to my front wheel being a little bit closer to me. Again, it's just something I had to adjust mentally, but once I got it, it felt fine. I'm not the most confident jumper at high speeds, but I do think this bike would handle jumping better if you're able to take them a little bit faster. I don't want all of this to sound negative because it isn't. This bike was a ton of fun in a lot of different scenarios, but it is clearly geared more towards fast downhill descending. So if you're a beginner or you're looking for an efficient pedaling bike, this probably isn't the bike for you. So who is this bike for? Steel hardtail lovers, those who refuse to get a full suspension bike, or if you just love to go fast downhill. If you live somewhere with one long climb to the top and then you get to do some gnarly descents, this bike is incredible for that. My only regret is that I did not get to take this bike outside of Texas for some longer descents. I think this thing would be incredibly fun at Pisgah, somewhere like that. I can feel my back disagreeing with me, but I don't care. I love riding hardtails and I'm just gonna ignore my 35-year-old decrepit spine. And finally, let's go ahead and give the Elroy a Cobra Score. The Elroy is well equipped with an excellent fork and nice tires given that you don't care about pedaling efficiency. A Dior drivetrain and low spec brakes don't exactly scream high end, so it gets a 5 out of 10. You can tell this is a really well thought out design, extra mounts for tools, weather resistant protection, and a really nice riding steel frame. The paint job is also beautiful, and I love the attention to detail and homage to a restaurant. 7 out of 10. It's a burly steel hardtail for aggressive riding. Of course it's going to be pretty hefty. Weight should not be your priority when shopping for a steel enduro hardtail, but at nearly 34 pounds, the Elroy gets a 4 out of 10. This thing has some insane geometry, but it is spot on with what you'd expect from an enduro-focused bike. Sure, it felt a bit awkward to me at first, but once I got used to it, oh man, this bike felt right. 7 out of 10. This one's a bit tricky. Compared to boutique brand steel hardtails, and even some competitors like the slightly more expensive Honzo ESD or Norco Torrent, the Elroy is an absolute bargain. However, most shoppers will see that $2,800 price tag and argue they can get a full suspension for that price. Technically they're right, but obviously that person hasn't spent any time on a really good steel hardtail, and you should remove them from your life. They just don't get it. 5 out of 10. The Elroy will get you to the top out of necessity, but you won't rocket past anyone unless you're a pillar of skill and fitness. A slightly less aggressive tire would do wonders for this bike's climbing abilities, but again, not really the focus here. 3 out of 10. You're joking, right? I can't see anyone actually using this as a cross-country bike, and if they do, they probably don't win much. I'm being generous here with a 2 out of 10. For 95% of the trails I ride, this bike was fine, but I was more eager to grab a less aggressive hardtail if I knew the ride required a decent amount of pedaling. You could totally rock this as your only bike, but if you do live in a flatter area, I would look for something else. 4 out of 10. This is what the Elroy is made for, and it certainly does not disappoint. It's fast, composed, and one of the best times I've had going downhill. For a hardtail, it's getting a very respectable 7 out of 10. I love this bike, and it was amazing fun at Spider Mountain, Reveille Peak Ranch, places like that with downhill and enduro lines, but I wasn't as stoked to ride it locally here in San Antonio. As I've always said, you have to buy the right bike for where you live. If I live somewhere with 1,000 or 2,000 foot descents, this bike would get me more pumped for daily use, but I don't live somewhere with 1,000 or 2,000 foot descents. In any case, I'm still giving this bike a 6 out of 10. That gives the Elroy a score of a 50 out of 100. The Growler does score a little bit better because it's a slightly more well-rounded bike, it weighs less, it's cheaper, it's just not going to perform as well on the descents. The Marin Elroy is a rowdy good time, and I was actually pretty sad to send this one back. Thank you again to Marin for allowing me to demo this bike. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And there we go, that's the end of the review. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the Marin Elroy. I always love reading your comments. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you are new here, because we would love to have you here. That's all I got for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next one, stay rowdy within reason. I think I'm gonna go eat a burrito now. See y'all later.